All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you. Welcome all our Torah Anytime's viewers, listeners, subscribers, and everything else that happens on Torah Anytime. Whether it's on the phone system, on the app, there's like so much stuff going on. It's unbelievable. It's amazing. So just a quick announcement that we are still raising money for the new camera, which by the way, this is being recorded on the new camera. So we do have a little bit of fundraising that we still need to do. Whoever wants to join in this fundraising, you don't send the money to me, you send the money directly to Torah Anytime, and you write in there, Zitron camera or whatever it is, or you don't have to write anything, you just send me a picture of it, and I'm keeping track of how much we have to still raise for it. But Baruch Hashem, we are getting closer to where we need to be. Okay, so that being said, tonight we are learning Le'ilu Nishmat Binyamin Real ben Gershon Yeshaya, as well as Le'ilu Nishmat Avram ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Avraham. Okay, so tonight we're going to see if we're going to be doing it in this in one class, or we're going to split it into two classes. So the topic is the refuah before, the Hebrew topic is the refuah before the Makkah. Oh, and one more, there's we're learning tonight the refuah shlema to Yehoshua ben Esther. So we're learning. So the topic tonight is the refuah before the Makkah, and let's try to I would really, whenever we speak about a topic, what I like to do is try to get on the topic from all angles. So sometimes it's a very simple topic. It's something that's very straightforward, easy to understand, and many other rabbis would just touch on it very little. I prefer to go on it from a full angle and sort of just try to encapsulate it with the knowledge, from all different angles, and this way you're really able to, internalize the idea, the concept. So that's why we go through very, very deep in different ideas, and this one I want to really try to go also from all different angles. A very, very simple, at least to understand, concept of refuah before the Makkah, but yet can be looked at in quite a different angle. So just try to understand the idea behind it. So there's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, this is in page 40b, speaks about the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was the compiler of the Mishnah. He took all the information and he compiled and he wrote the Mishnah. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi had severe intestinal pains, and what he needed, the healing aspect that he needed, was a certain apple cider. But the problem is that this apple cider was only produced by people that were idolaters, people that served the Avodah Zarah. And the way to ensure that it was kosher, it would have to have been stored for 70 years. Now, how are you going to find something right now? You want to go and you want to buy something that's stored for 21 years, right? You want to buy a liquor. Usually these are the things that are stored for 21 years, other than people's money. But you have, liquor. This is what's stored. You want to buy something for 21 years, you're paying hundreds of dollars. You want to buy something that's for, 30 years, you're paying thousands of dollars. Imagine you're looking for something that was stored for 70 years. 70 years, this is a lifespan in the olden days. This is what a full life, would be, 70 years. Who goes and takes something and stores it for that long? Meaning that it was very difficult to find. And his attendants went and they searched all over to try to find this apple cider that was stored for 70 years that could be used to heal Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and it would still follow all the kosher, guidelines. And they searched and they searched, and they actually found something. They found the apple cider that was stored for 70 years. Rabbi Yehuda went and he drank it, and he was healed. And Rabbi Yehuda says, to Kadosh Baruch Hu, to God, thank you, Hashem, you're so kind. If you think about it for a second, you had this, and you stored it for me, Hashem. You stored it for me for all these years. The person that put it in is very, very likely not the same person that's getting it to me right now, meaning that it could be a father, a grandfather, some business that was sold from one to another, meaning that it transferred so many generations, and it was all for me. Literally, Bishvili Nivra Olam, the world was created for me. And the idea behind this is that 70 years before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi had the stomach intestinal pains, there was somebody who decided to store this apple cider for the next 70 years. So the refuah, the healing source of what the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi needed was already prepared for him well before, like, he needed it, well before he was born, like so far before in advance that he even had a thought of needing it. And we see this also in Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? The Yidden went into Mitzrayim, and the Torah tells us that there were 70 people that went into Mitzrayim. And this is in Bereshis, in Genesis chapter 46, verse 27. There were 70 people that went into Mitzrayim, but you go and you count, and you add the numbers up, that only equals 69. Where is the 70th? So the Gemara in Bava Basra goes and tells us who the 70th person was. The 70th person was Yocheved, who was born, meaning that her mother was pregnant with her, but she was born as they entered Mitzrayim. Meaning that Yocheved, who was Yocheved? Yocheved was Moshe Rabbeinu's mother. The savior of the Jewish people was born as the Jewish people went into Mitzrayim, went into what was later going to be their slavery. And this is all based off of the Gemara in Megillah, page 13b. That says, the Amar Reish Lakish says, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Maka Es Yisrael. God does not go and give an infliction, a suffering, a punishment to Bnei Yisrael, Ela Im Kein Bare Lahem Refuat Chila. Only if HaKadosh Baruch Hu first creates a healing, the salvation first, meaning that the salvation comes before the affliction. We get afflicted, but the salvation has already existed beforehand. And that is the concept of the refuah before the makkah. Now the question is, why is this important to know? Maybe it's nice to know, maybe it's important to know. I would like to go through, when we finish this, I don't know if we're going to do it in one class or two class, 7 different subcategories in this topic. So I want to give you the 7 categories, and then Be'ezrat Hashem we'll go through it one by one. So the question really is, why is it important to know? Why does the Torah need to tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the refuah, the salvation, the healing before the makkah, before the affliction, before the burden, before the suffering, before the pain? So number one, the first thing that we learn from this is that it's planned. Meaning that this is a very planned, I don't want to call it an attack, because an attack is a very negative concept, but this is a planned attack. I don't know, that's the best word I can come out with. This is planned. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu did to you or to me or to anybody else, anything negative, positive, or anything in between, this was all planned. Meaning that, why is it important to know that it was planned? Once something is planned, that means that there has to be a reason for it. So when you plan something, some things happen spontaneous, right? Of course, there's nothing at random, but something happens that's and a spontaneous thing. When you plan something, that means that there is a reason that you want to do it. So here's an example. Most people, they plan a vacation. Now, what is the reason that they plan the vacation? The reason behind it is that they want to go and enjoy themselves and have all the preparation done beforehand. So they know that they're going to come and they're going to go land in this airport, and they're going to be able to get from their airport to the hotel, and they're going to be able to do this activity at this day, this activity at that day, and that everything, why there's a reason for everything that they're doing. They're planning it beforehand. Now granted, the fact that they're relaxing or whatever they're doing, there might not be the full reason that they comprehend, but once you plan something, that means that you have a reason for it. You don't want to waste time, you want to relax, you want to go pray, whatever it is that you want to do. So that's number one. Number two, the benefit of knowing about this is that when somebody, God forbid, gets affected by something, it's so amazing to know that the cure is already created. And now, let me try to explain it this way. If somebody here's something that I've seen recently. There was somebody who was very wealthy that he decided that he was going to buy a poisonous snake. Now the problem with owning first of all, to all those snake lovers that own pet snake owners, I guess I could say, I don't know why you do it, but let's say you have a snake. For reasons I do not understand, I cannot comprehend, but you have a snake. But let's say that snake is poisonous. There is a chance that that snake will bite you. Again, of course, it's in a cage. Of course, it's not roaming your house, and you don't take it on a walk with a leash. It's locked up, but there is a chance for it. There is a certain wealthy person that had a, non-Jewish, he had a snake in his house. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, I believe it was a king cobra, meaning a poisonous snake that if the snake bites him, he has, I want to say 15 minutes to live. Not that long, right? And this is what he brings in his house as a pet. And what he did was that just to be safe, is near the cage, the glass enclosure where this snake is kept, he kept a antidote. That if the snake bites him, he has 15 minutes to take that antidote and inject it to himself, otherwise he dies. So the fact that he has the cure, the antidote, he can enjoy the snake a lot more. It's like, okay, fine, it's dangerous, but I got something that I have as a backup. Meaning that even if, God forbid, he gets attacked by the snake and he gets bit by the snake, the attack, the affliction, the suffering that he goes to, at least emotionally in his mind, is not going to be as terrible because he knows that he has the antidote. As opposed to if he doesn't have the antidote, and if he doesn't have the salvation, if he doesn't have what's going to save him, the attack, besides being physically painful, it's going to be emotionally and intellectually painful because he knows he's going to be struggling and be like, how am I going to save myself? So when the Torah tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the refuah before the makkah, that means that that anything that happens, we know that the antidote is right there. It's there. We have to access it, but it's there, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu already created for us. That's number 2. Number 3, on why this is so important, is that sometimes we can see that our original discomfort can either be a minor discomfort, or it could be a major discomfort, but it ultimately becomes our salvation. Meaning that it's like a 2-step process. That sometimes the affliction that we get, the suffering that we get, the pain that we get, is only a minor pain, and that's really just to help us with the salvation that we need to get. A simple explanation is that you get a shot, you get an inoculation, right? So you get a shot, whether it's the flu shot, whether it's a vaccine, whether it's an allergy shot, whatever it is, you're getting a shot. The initial shot is painful, but what you're gaining from it is going to be what's going to help you in the future. It's either going to prevent you from getting certain diseases, or it's going to heal you, or it's pain medication. There's so many things that can come in that's initially painful, but the minor discomfort overcomes the major issues that are coming on later. Now, this initial discomfort can either come in minor or major, and it could be exponentially greater later, and we'll soon see how. This is number 3. Number 4 is that sometimes we don't even realize the suffering, meaning we don't even realize the discomfort. We don't even realize the makkah, and we'll explain that as well. B'ezrat Hashem. Number 5 is that the salvation can be years away. Sometimes, the best example that I could give is when someone misses a flight. And, it's very frustrating to miss a flight. There's so much preparation and planning, and then you got to go, and you got to run to the airport, you got to go through all security. And after all that, you miss a flight. What initially comes up and be like, well, it must be that the plane is going to explode. Because why else would I miss the flight? But let's say the plane doesn't explode, and let's hope that it does not explode. We should still know that was for our benefit. Maybe we won't see that until years in the future, maybe until 120. But the salvation is there. The suffering that we got, the salvation is there somewhere, but we might not see it until years in the future. Number 6 is that when someone gets afflicted, pained, hurt by somebody else, it's usually, not always, but it's usually, there's an emotional thing, meaning if someone hurts you, harms you, and I'm saying intentionally, not unintentionally, it's usually like, either it's anger, it's, frustration, there's something over there, there's the spirit of frustration, there's something that's going on in the other person that's causing you to get that suffering from this person. But once you know that this person may be causing you a suffering, but there is already a salvation in place, then the suffering is not so bad. The suffering is not so bad. And the best example that I could give you is the previous example with the shot. Meaning that the doctor is giving you the shot. Now, we're intellectual people. We're able to understand that the doctor is giving us a shot. We know that's for our benefit. We know that we're going to gain from it, so it doesn't bother us so much. But imagine it wasn't a doctor. Imagine it was a random guy in the street just go and throw a dart that's with a very small bezel right into your arm, and then he injects it. You're like, well, what are you doing? It's so painful. What are you doing? And then he says, oh no, I just gave you the flu shot. First of all, definitely check yourself into a doctor and get yourself checked out if that does happen. But that, of course, that's going to be like, wait a minute, like, like, you don't feel comfortable with that. You don't know what this guy is. You don't know what he injected you. There's so many issues that are coming up. But if you know it's a doctor, you know that it's out there for your benefit, then when he does something for you, it doesn't hurt as much. So to speak, if let's say you have a child, that the mother wants to give the child medicine. And, many times the medicine is bitter. And the mother is trying to go and is trying to go and to convince this child to take this medicine. And this child is saying, no, I don't want this medicine. You're a bad mommy. Why are you doing this to me? Like as a child is being a child. The mother will be like, no, it's for your benefit. And in fact, if the mother wouldn't give you the medication, that would make her a bad mother. But the fact that she is giving you the medicine, that is the fact that makes her a good mother. So, meaning that sometimes when we see that it's coming from a loving place, we're able to deal with it in a much easier fashion, as opposed to if it's coming from like a random thing. And many times when we go in our life, we don't put those two and two we don't connect those dots that it's coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And once it's coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there is a refuah already created before the makkah. And if we're able to make that connection, everything that we're dealing with makes it all that easier to deal with. And this really is like, when bad things happen, we should know that everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created for our benefit. But all this information that I'm giving you right now, it's a preliminary information to be able to get to that. You have to know that it came from God. You have to know that God loves you. You have to know that God is doing for the best. And not only that, you have to know that there is a salvation already waiting for you. That's number 6. And the final thing is number 7, accessing that salvation, meaning tapping into, and how do we get into that salvation? So let's go through this, one by one. Okay, so the first one, that it's planned, right? Before Makkah, that it's planned. In Shanghai in 1927, there was a Sephardic Jew, Shanghai, China, that is, and there was a Sephardic Jew by the name of Silas Hardon. And he was childless, and he was a successful businessman, and he started giving money to Chinese charities. One night, his father comes to him in a dream, and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Why are you giving money to the Chinese charities?" He says, "What about your own people? Like, what about the Jewish people? They need money also." So he wakes up and he ignores it. But the dream kept on repeating itself. It kept on reoccurring. Until finally he went to the Chacham, he went to the rabbi, and he says, "Rabbi, what am I supposed to do?" So the rabbi said, "Build a beautiful synagogue in the center of Shanghai." And the rabbi says, it should be big enough that it could hold hundreds of seats, and it should have a kitchen, a dining room, like build an edifice for God. And he followed the rabbi's advice, and he built this beautiful shul right in the middle of Shanghai, and he called it Bet Aaron, in memory of his father Aaron. The problem is that how many Jews are in Shanghai? How many Jews are sitting there in the center of China? A few years go by, and this Mr. Hadun, he passes away. And at this point, there's this beautiful shul in the middle of Shanghai that there's barely even a minyan in it. And I want to just tell you, like, I've been to shuls when, like in places in Europe, you see these beautiful shuls. Granted, it was built when there was, many Jews living there. But there's beautiful, huge shuls where there's barely a minyan. The Jews are no longer there. Look at the shul. It's so beautiful. It's so amazing, but it's empty. There's no one there. And this shul in Shanghai, with all its beauty and glory, there was no one showing up. There was no one there. There was no Jews in Shanghai. 8 years later, it was 1939, and there was a small Polish town, of Mir, and this came under the Nazi rule, and the students had to run away, and they ran to a place near there in Vilna, in Lithuania, and at that time, Japan had a diplomatic presence by somebody by the name of Sugihara that was in Lithuania, and what Mr. Sugihara was doing, he was violating at all all Japanese policy. But he was working nonstop, and he was granting, these transit visas to all these Jews. He saw what was going on. The Holocaust was going on. The Nazis were murdering Jews left and right and putting them in concentration camps, in labor camps. And he made it his mission to try to get as many Jews as he can out of Europe, out of where the Nazi rule was. And he was signing off on thousands of visas, and included in these visas was the Mir Yeshiva. And the Mir Yeshiva was able to take these visas, and they were able to cross Russia they went through the Trans-Siberian Railway, and they ended up in Japan in 1943. And they couldn't stay in Japan, so they ended up being deported to a Jewish ghetto in Shanghai, China. Now, there was a whole yeshiva of boys that were sitting over there. They were homeless. They didn't have anywhere to go. They were penniless. They needed a place to live. And where were they going to go? The whole yeshiva was traveling together. So where could they find, in the middle of China, in 1943, where are they going to find? And lo and behold, what do they find? They discovered this magnificent shul that was built 16 years prior, and it practically remained unused. That it was just sitting there and was just like waiting. It had a dining room, it had all this, it had everything ready, but it was nothing there. And that's where the Mir Yeshiva ended up staying, in Shanghai. And when I was in the Mir Yeshiva, you had people over there that remembered while they were there. The Rosh Yeshiva was there back in Shanghai. They were, they remembered during their time in China, learning over there. And you look at what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did 16 years prior to the need of this shul. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that there was going to come a Holocaust. He knew what there was going to be with the Nazis. He knew that there was going to be a Japanese diplomatic that's going to go against the rule. He's going to go in and try to get, and they're going to end up in Shanghai. But where are they going to go in Shanghai? HaKadosh Baruch Hu set everything up that the salvation was already 16 years before any issue ever came up. This is what it means when everything is planned. You look at it, how you had a wealthy guy in China. He was giving donations. God sent a message to him through his father. It says, why don't you do something? And a rabbi said, make a shul. Why? Why would you make a shul? If you were right now dropped off in somewhere, I don't know, I want to say somewhere where there's no Chabad, because now people, travel. Somewhere far off, in a faraway land where nobody travels over there, no one's, interested in being there, there's no Jews over there, and you want to donate money. So what would you do? Okay, you donate to Kiev, you could donate to Torah, you donate to Eretz Yisrael. Would you say go and build a shul right here when there's no Jews around? Why? That seems like, it's almost like backwards. Why would you do it? When things like don't make sense that they're happening, and then they happen, and then you look back, you'd be like, wait a minute. Like, this is like a very, very obvious that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the puppet master here, and it was pulling all the strings exactly where it needed to be. Going on to number 2, that was number 1, that everything is planned. Very important concept to know in your life, that everything that happens is planned. Number 2, we said that the cure was already created. Rabbi Elimelech Biderman brings a story that there was a person that lived in Monroe, and he was a member of Hatzalah over there, and he decided one day that he wants to go and be at Rabbi Yeshaya of Karestin. He wanted to be by the yurtzeit by his caver in Europe, in Hungary, in Budapest. And this is something that he's never done before. It's not like he goes every year, but something popped into his head, and he wanted to do it. And he was searching up, tickets, and he saw that the only ticket to Hungary was leaving from the yurtzeit himself, meaning that he would have to leave New York from the same day that the yurtzeit was, and he would have to fly to Hungary again. Because of the time switch, he was able to make it, but only if everything went smoothly. Meaning he would book that ticket, he would fly in the only flight that he would be able to, he would land on the day of the yurtzeit, and if everything went smoothly, he would be able to get to the caver, to the grave, before the end of the day. So he books his ticket. And after he books his ticket, he orders a car. It's very hard to drive over there and figure everything out. So he orders a car that he should be able to pick him up by the airport and take him straight to the grave. Everything is planned. He lands in Hungary, And he starts looking for the driver, and he can't find the driver. He's trying to call, nothing. It's out. It took him a full hour until he located, and every minute is precious over here. You got to make it before Shkia to be able to daven by the yurtzeit. That's all he flew for. And finally, after a full hour, he was able to locate the driver. When they got on the road, they were driving. And a short while later, the driver had to make a short stop because there was a car crash that took place right in front of their car. And the driver, slams on the brakes. They come to a screeching halt. The driver jumps, out. Look what's happening. Meanwhile, this person is sitting in the back seat. This Jewish person from Monroe, he's an Hatzalah. He jumps out also. He's like, what's going on? He looks at the car accident, and he sees inside the people that were in a car accident were 2 Jewish people. And he runs over to them, and because of his experience in Hatzalah, he takes them out of the car, and they were unconscious. They didn't have a heartbeat. They were completely gone at that point. And he started, performing CPR. And the problem was there was 2 of them. So what he was going to do, so he was alternating. He was doing CPR on one, and then he was jumping on the other. And everybody else was standing there inside. No one knew what to do. He was the only one experienced to know what to do in this situation. And he's jumping in, doing compressions, pushing on the chest over here, inhaling some air in this one, jumping to the other one. And he's going back and forth. And he did it for 15 minutes. 15 minutes until the ambulance arrived. Finally, the ambulance arrived. They took both of these young men and they brought them, to the hospital. And because of this person's CPR experience and his Hatzalah, he was able to save these 2 Jewish young men. And look at what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent this man, popped into his head. A week prior, let me travel 4,000 miles to go to a caver that I've never went before on the yurtzeit, and then only find a ticket that was barely going to make it, but let me try. And then he got delayed in the airport because he had to be exactly where he needed to be. He needed to be the hour late because he needed to be right behind this car that was supposed to get into an accident. Now let's try to break this down a little bit. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved these 2 people. We could easily ask, so why get them in an accident in the first place? Why send this guy all the way from Monroe to save them? Let them just not get into an accident. They got saved at the end. They have to just go straight. And the answer is, they needed to get into an accident. For whatever reason, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that they needed to have this happen. But then you can ask, but it could have been the person that saved them. Could it be a different Hatzalah member? You think there was there's only a Hatzalah member that flies? There could have been a guy that goes every single year. And every single year, this guy travels to Reb Shaila's caver, and he was the one who had experience, and he could have done exactly the same thing that this person did it. But no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, no, it's going to be this person that never went before. He's going to travel 4,000 miles, be delayed to be the one to save them. Why? Because not only that HaKadosh Baruch Hu planned the affliction, HaKadosh Baruch Hu also planned the salvation. But not only does HaKadosh Baruch Hu plan the salvation, he also plans where that salvation is going to come from. Who is that salvation going to come from? From which person? It has to be this guy. This guy was the messenger, for whatever reasons, to save these 2 young men's life. And the next time that something happens, we have to realize that the salvation is not only already in place, but the messenger is already in place, meaning that this takes it a step level that we were discussing previously. Meaning that we just said everything is planned, everything's something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the salvation before the makkah, before the affliction. But not only that, it's planned to such a detail that the way that the salvation is going to come, it's going to be from a specific person. And we can attest to that in our own lives. How many times did we go and we had an issue and we speak to this, whether it's medical, whether it's emotional, whatever it is, parnasa, whatever it is, and we speak to so many different people to try to get our salvation, and then finally one person happens to help us, and it's usually like something that was never even planned. It was like, oh, I happened to see him, and I happened to say this, and I happened to say that, and he happened to recommend me to this doctor, and it's sort of like things that kind of like just like happen, what we think, and it ends up with our salvation. And the answer is, and the reason for that is because there is a messenger that is supposed to take you out of that. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to set it up to that you will meet with that messenger when it's appropriate at the right time. And sometimes these salvation, they come in a what seems to be useless information. So to explain, there was a man, this Rabbi David Asher says a story, there was a man that told him that he was learning at night, he lives in Miami, he was learning at night with a neurologist. And the week prior to the story happening, he said this neurologist's daughter suffered a brain aneurysm. Baruch Hashem, she's healthy, she made it, and this neurologist was explaining to his chavrusa, to his study partner, the symptoms of a brain aneurysm. And he was he was a neurologist, so he was explaining it in like complex medical terminology, until finally the guy says, listen, just the chavrusa is like, I'm not a doctor, just tell it to me in plain English. Like sometimes you're talking to somebody, whether it's in the computer world or whether it's in the medical world, and you're like, okay, like now. You don't want to say dumb it down for me because you don't want to say I'm dumb. I don't understand. Can you say it in very simple second grade level? But you want to say, like, what do people say? Tell it to me in plain English. So he tells them in plain English. He says, if somebody feels that they're having the worst headache that they've ever had in their life, that can be a sign of a brain aneurysm. So he says, oh wow. He says, I never knew that. It's good to know. A short while later, this man flies to New Jersey, from Miami to New Jersey, and he's attending a family bar mitzvah. And at the Shabbos meal, he's sitting by his in-laws, and at the end of the meal, his brother-in-law was not in the room. So he goes and he says, where's my brother-in-law? And he says, he wasn't feeling well, he went to lay down. And in the meantime, they're expecting him to return slowly, but it's been quite some time, and the brother-in-law still didn't return. So, this man from Miami decided, let me go and check him out, see if everything is okay. So he goes over to to his brother-in-law and says, what's up? How are you feeling? And he says, I really don't, feel well. I have a headache. So this, my head is hurting me. So this man goes, and for some reason, he says, can you describe to me the pain? For reasons, he's not a doctor. Why did he say that? Who knows? But he just happened to say, can you describe to me the pain? And, his brother-in-law is he's like, this is like the worst headache I've ever had in my life. And that all of a sudden, like a light bulb, like ding, 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 ding. He's like, wait, what? Is it the worst headache? And he says, a week ago, I heard about it, and he goes and he picks up the phone and he calls Hatzalah, and his family's like, what are you doing? And he's like, he has a headache. He has a worst, yeah, I'm calling Hatzalah. And everyone's like, it's a headache, relax. Like, what's the big deal? It's a headache. He's like, no, Hatzalah needs to come. And he calls Hatzalah, people, the family, the person, he's like, we don't need it. And he says, we need Hatzalah. The paramedics come down. And they're discussing, what's going on, and the family's like, "You called Hatzalah for a headache on Shabbos? That's what you called?" And he goes and he says, you use the word as he's talking to the paramedics, as he's talking to the family. All of a sudden, his brother-in-law became paralyzed in half his body. The paramedics saw this. They quickly gave him oxygen. They did whatever they could to help, and they quickly rushed him to the hospital. And there, he took a turn for the worse, and he had to be taken by a helicopter to another hospital. And eventually, they were able to, stabilize his condition. And later, the Hatzalah volunteer told this person, he says, if the paramedics were not there at the time that this happened, he would not have survived. You think about this, like, what just happened? Like break down that story for just a minute. This person had information that was, at the point that he received it, was pure useless information. He was like the most, difficult, annoying, painful headache he's ever had in his life. He's like, okay, he just like registered in the back of his brain. Not a week goes by, and he's, in New York, and the same information comes up, that the worst headache, and he calls Hatzalah against everyone from what the family says, and he ends up saving this person's life. Like, HaKadosh Baruch Hu set it up that he was, the Chavrusa would go, like, why would the Chavrusa even tell? There's so many things that we could break it down, but we don't have the time to. But like, the fact that this Chavrusa, that he was a neurologist, the fact that he was able to explain it in its simple English, as only a doctor would be able to. The fact that he was by this location, the fact that by his brother-in-law, meaning the fact that he went to visit him, the fact that the brother-in-law said it, there's like so many steps that had to come into place only to get to the point of where he would be saved because of the information that he was received privacy. Because the salvation came already. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, in a week's time, you're going to need to know this because we need to save this person. He needs to go through something. But we're going to save him. How are we going to save? How things went one after another is so comforting to know. Now, speaking about headaches, there was a rabbi that was on an airplane, and he had also a splitting headache. And, he gets this, often, and he goes over to the flight attendant and says, excuse me, do you have any ibuprofen? Yeah, like Motrin, like something that has ibuprofen in there, Advil. And the flight attendant says, I'm sorry, we don't have ibuprofen, but we happen to have aspirin. And the rabbi's like, I really need ibuprofen. Ibuprofen is what usually helps me. Well, everybody has their own medication, whether it's ibuprofen, acetaminophen, different thing, or aspirin. And for this particular rabbi, he needed ibuprofen. That's what helps him. So he goes to the flight attendant and says, listen, if all you have is just aspirin, give me the aspirin. I'll take the aspirin. And he takes the aspirin and he takes a large dose. He says, I need a large dose to be able to, he knows what he needs, and he takes this large dose of aspirin. A few hours go by, and they land, and he starts feeling this numb feeling, and he rushes over to the doctor, and he explains the symptoms. And the doctor hears the symptoms, and he says, you had a stroke. That's why you're numb. And the guy's like, what? He's like, like stroke, that major thing. He's like, no, I didn't. I wouldn't have. He's like, no, you had a stroke, but I don't. And the doctor ran some tests and says, you really should have been a lot worse than you had. Have you take any medication against a stroke? And the guy's like, no, Baruch Hashem, I never had a stroke before in my life. Why would I take any medication? He says, you didn't take anything, like blood thinner, like you didn't take anything. And the guy's thinking, he says, I was on a plane not too long ago, and I took, a high, dose of aspirin, but that was the last medication I took, nothing for the stroke. And the doctor's like, no, that was it. He says, the aspirin, he says, that prevented the tremendous amount of difficulties that you would have had from this stroke. If you wouldn't have taken this aspirin, this aspirin literally saved your life. You would have not have lasted if you didn't take this aspirin. That from based off the blood thinning, all the characteristics of the aspirin. Ibuprofen wouldn't have helped him. Tylenol wouldn't have helped him. The only thing that would have helped him was aspirin. That was the only thing that could have helped him. Meaning that if he was not on an airplane, he would have just found some ibuprofen, taken it. He was on an airplane. He was locked to whatever medication they had. All they had was aspirin. He had a debilitating headache. Didn't have to have the headache. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent him a little minor headache. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent him, and only later that it ended up happening that the aspirin, the headache, was for his benefit. The fact that there was no ibuprofen was for his benefit. The fact that he took aspirin was for his benefit, and that ended up saving his life. And that's just a minor issue. You could have, major issues. Like it's getting a little bit late, so maybe we'll end it a little bit early. Let's touch upon like a major discomfort. There was a person who had a shidduch. And the shidduch, he was a top bacher, like a top single guy. Like everything was going for him. And he ended up marrying into family, like a very wealthy, very famous family. It looked like it was like a great shidduch. The problem was it was a total mismatch. It just didn't work out from the get-go, from the beginning. And a very short while later, they got divorced. And after he was divorced, he had a heart. When he was single, he was a top guy. Everything was going for him, but now, he's divorced. He came in with a little bit of extra baggage, and he had a very difficult time, getting remarried. And he was suggested this more of a simple girl, not, the girls that he was dating, on a high caliber that he was. And he started dating the simple girl, and it ended up working out, like, really well. They really connected. They appreciated each other. They understood each other. And one thing led to another, and they ended up getting married. And he was telling over this to his rabbi, and he says, looking back, he says, the wife that I got, it was worth, and this is him saying it, nobody else can say it other than him, it was worth all the pain and the suffering. Divorce is very difficult. He says it was worth all the pain, the suffering, the embarrassment of his divorce just to get to the wife that he has now. And he tells us to the rabbi, he says, when I first started dating, I would have never gone out with my wife right now. I was biased. I had ego. I thought I would have never even looked at her. He says, but now that I went through what I went through, this is what I was left with, and this is what I thought. And I thought I was settling. I thought I was going down. But little did I know that I was marrying so much higher than I ever thought I had. The difficulty that he went through, the divorce, the embarrassment, the pain, the suffering that he went through was only for the salvation that came only much later. Through so much difficulty, and he himself attested to it, that it was all worth it. Now I can tell you, I've known, plenty of people that have had a very, very picky, onset of their dating, and later they worked on themselves, and they were able to bring it down, and they were able to go and find their bashar. They were able to find their soulmate. But it doesn't always happen. Sometimes it has to go through difficulties. And once it goes through difficulties, that's when they're able to sometimes come out with that salvation because of the difficulties that they went through. So being that it's a little bit late, we're going to break this class into two, but let's do a very, very quick recap, and then we'll open up to any questions. We went through three things, 3 out of the 7 things that we wanted to touch on. Number 1, we said that it's planned. The importance of knowing that things that happen in your life, it's planned, it's orchestrated from up above, means that there was a reason for it. And while we may not understand the reason, we may not see the reason, but down the line, we're going to see it. Down the line, we're going to see of why there had to be a wealthy businessman in China to build a shul that only could benefit the Mir Yeshiva 16 years in the future. Everything has a plan, everything has a purpose, even if we don't understand it. The second thing that we mentioned is that the cure was already created before the affliction, before the suffering. Meaning that no matter where we're holding and what our issue is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu already created the cure. The antidote is right there. And once we know that the antidote is right there, we may not have grasped it yet. We may not have tapped into it yet. But once we know that it's there, we're able to deal with that difficulty just a little bit easier. The more that you contemplate this, the easier that it's going to be. And the final thing that we mentioned is that sometimes it could be a minor issue or it could be a major issue, but down the line, we see the salvation that comes on. It could be a very, very minor thing, such as a headache, and we can't get the right medication, and that later on saves us. Or it could be a major thing like a divorce, and that later saves on. So when we start off thinking and processing this information, processing the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a plan, that everything was already created beforehand, any difficulty that we arise in. And by the way, it's not just the difficulty, it's also the good. The good is also planned. The good is also for our benefit. With that, we'll be able to deal with our life in so much of an easier, happier, and more emotionally stable focus, a more or better yet, of an angle that we look at things, and we're able to deal with things both positive and the negative, knowing where the source came from. And while we didn't finish everything that we want to, B'ezrat Hashem will continue the next time. But right now we will open to any questions. Okay, first question that we have over here is, why do we need to go through so much pain? Why can't we just have a perfect world? Why can't we be created in Olam Haba? There doesn't have to be a concept of having earning be greater than just a gift. Why does God have to be in pain and us too? Okay, this is a great question. This is a question that's not only so loaded with like information and like understanding, of what we have to like tap into, but I'm going to try to give a brief overview on it. So why do we have to go through pain? Really, we could break this down into like a few different classes, just this question. The class in itself could be like, why do we have to go through pain? Like why it's a suffering. And in fact, we did speak about this, before in different times in different series. But the reason why we have to go through pain and suffering is not because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to go through pain and suffering, but rather because it's for our benefit. So let's try to explain it like this. So we need to let's use the example that we gave before with an injection. We need to get an injection. The question is, why is it that we have to get an injection to get the inoculation, to get the medicine? Why do we need to get an injection? Why not create, and in fact they've tried creating this, and to some extent they've done it, let's say a flu shot through a nasal spray. Instead of getting shot, just, a little, or a pill, pop a pill, you get this stuff, in there. So through medicine, right, there's better if you get certain things subcutaneous or intramuscular, meaning that when you're putting it in your mouth, the way that your medicine is getting, absorbed into your body, it's through your stomach, and then it gets absorbed and eventually goes to your bloodstream. There's different ways. That's through a medication, through orally. But if you take it through subcutaneous, that goes through your fat. If you put it intramuscular, that goes into your muscle. And it lasts differently. It has there's different benefits, and there are some cons also. There's different benefits of putting it one way or another. But that's why sometimes we need to go through some pain, because that pain is where that benefit is going to be. Meaning the benefit of the shot outweighs the benefit that if we would just have a pill, meaning they won't last as long. There's so many other things that come into play. So sometimes we have to go through pain for our benefit that we cannot even begin to understand it. Now you could say, well, God created the world. God created everything. Let God create it, that we don't need to go through the pain. And in fact, God did create it that way, that we don't need to go through the pain to a certain extent, right? We know that there's a sin of Adam and Chava, that we have to go through certain pain, but really God created, but the fact that we have to go through pain is not that something on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's something on us. If we have to go through some sort of pain, it's a reason that we have to do it. It's our fault. We tend to think, okay, God, why are you doing this to me? But really, what happened was that we got ourselves into a bind. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to get us out of that bind. In order to get us out of that bind, we go through that pain. So to explain it in a brief way, if someone does an Aveira, they do a sin. So now they put themselves in a bind. But how are they going to get out of that? Now HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I have to get you out of that. You're in a sin. What happens when you sin is that you encapsulate yourself. You sort of put yourself a klipa, a shell of impurity. Now God says, I need to remove that impurity. You can't have impurity in a pure, holy soul. So how am I going to remove that impurity? Through different things. Might be through pain, might be through suffering. But what all that is just that medicine that may be bitter, may be difficult, may pinch a little bit, but that's to give us that medicine that comes in. So meaning it's all on us. Okay, so that's a brief. I know I didn't touch on everything, but I do want to get through all. It's a really loaded. I love the question. It's such a great question because you followed up with a great aspect of like, why does God have to be in pain? Also, because when we're in pain, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in pain. And in fact, we need to capitalize on that. Maybe that's not the right word to use, but when we daven for our healing, for our salvation, we should say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not only for us, you're also in pain, so save us for us, for you. Save us that the Shekhinah doesn't have to go in pain. But again, that's something I wanted to just try to answer it in brief, but really it's something for a whole class. Next question: should I take everything as a sign? Great question. The fact that I choose to join this Zoom and you chose this topic, does that mean anything? Okay, so let's start with the latter. For sure. The fact that you came and you listened to this topic, and if you've never been here before and this is the first time that you're joining, and by the way, for anybody who is a first-time listener or on Torah Anytime listening, you should know that if you do want to join our Women's Only Thursday Night class, you can reach out to me. We have a WhatsApp group that all the information, it's open to anyone that wants, any woman that wants to join. It's free, and the more the merrier. But the fact that, going back to your point, if you want to reach out to me to join in that, it's Rabbi Zitron at TorahAnytime.com if you want to reach out to me, and I can add you to that group. So now, let's go to the first part of that question. Should I take everything as a sign? So we have to be very careful on this, because sometimes we read too much into the signs and we tend to read wrong. And I could give you so many examples on this. You have somebody that's dating, and the guy shows up late, or the guy doesn't open up the door, or the guy doesn't do this, and be like, okay, so the guy doesn't open up the door, that means that he doesn't have manners. The fact that he showed up late, that it means that he's not punctual. So it must be that he is not polite. It must be that he's not going to be a good father. And we go through so many different things that we try to read the signs, and I have to tell you that many times I speak to people, and they tell me the signs that they saw, I could show them almost immediately that they read the situation wrong. So at one point, you have to be very careful. You're reading, like we could interpret signs wrong. But at the same point in time, yes, everything that happens, it is a sign. We have to open up our eyes, but we have to utilize it, and we have to have that balance of knowing, okay, there's a sign over here, but now how do I interpret that? So it's also very important, and it comes very beneficial this time. You speak to your rabbi, your rebbitzin, your mentor, be like, okay, listen, this is what happened. What do you think about this? Should I look into this? Should I not look into this? Is this a sign? Is this my own deficiency? Is this somebody else? So again, it all depends on the circumstance and what the issue was. But everything is definitely a sign, and everything we definitely should look into, but the question is how to look into that. And that's where you break it down. If you do it yourself, you do it through asking somebody else. Next question. How can a person continue to serve Hashem while they're angry with Him? Ooh, good question. How could you serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu when you're angry? First of all, if you're angry at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's a great thing, in a sense. Not perfectly, but when you're angry, that means, first of all, that you believe in Hashem. Because if you don't believe in Hashem, you wouldn't be angry at Him. Why would I anger? Well, So how do you connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if you're angry? So anger is an emotion. Anger is not something that's on the next person, but rather it's on me. Meaning that if you're angry at your spouse, your neighbor, your friend, your boss, your daughter, whatever it is, that's not a chisaron in the other person, that's a chisaron in you. Meaning anger is an internal emotion. So it's not about like what HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs to do differently or what my spouse needs to do differently, but rather it's what I need to do differently. So if you're angry at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not about trying to figure out the answer is not in like from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God's angle, but rather it's from your angle. Like, why am I angry and how do I work on this? We should never obviously be angry, but sometimes, emotions overcome us. So we have to break it down and realize why we're angry and how do we dissolve that. Sometimes you're not going to be able to dissolve it, initially. You're not going to be able to dissolve it. So then if you are able to, that's the path that you need to go. But if you can't dissolve it for whatever reason, you should still serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but you should go a little bit of a roundabout way. Now, what, when, and where, and how, it all depends on what the reason that you're angry. So I can't give a blanket thing, but if you want, you can reach out to me privately, and we'll try to, go through it and see, like, why you're angry, what's the issue, can we attack it straight on, remove the anger, and then you can connect, or is it something too strong that we can't just remove it yet, and we have to go a little bit of a roundabout, and how we're going to do that. Thank you for the kind words about liking the shiurim. I appreciate that. Okay, next question. Is reading signs based on your level of Emunah? Like last week, the Rabbi mentioned that Rabbi Akiva didn't light a fire lamp because he understood Hashem took it out. It was for a reason. To what extent should we look at signs? So whenever you're looking at signs, and generally, if you're really analyzing signs, I would strongly, strongly recommend that you speak to a Rav, a mentor, a rebbitzin, somebody that you could help. Because when we're reading signs, we could... I've spoken to people that they were so off, so off. They, so you should look at signs, but you have to be careful, especially when you go deep, to know how to read it, and it might be beneficial, and especially for big things. Small things, okay, fine, you say HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's, stick with that. But big things, you have to go and you have to speak to a Rav, a mentor, a rebbitzin, something like that. Okay? Thank you for the kind words. Okay. Yes, of course. I appreciate there was a message that came in thanking for davening in Eretz Yisrael. I have to say that was unbelievable that you guys were able to come in with so many names at such a short period of time. Really, it's all thanks to Sapir for putting it all together. But like I said last week, I was there at Eretz Yisrael, different places for like 15, 20. I was there sometimes with my brother, and I'm like sitting on my phone. I'm like going through all the names and going over there, and I'm like, no, I need some more time. So Baruch Hashem, I'm happy to be able to daven for our fellow Yidden. Okay. Here we go. Hold on a second. We have one last question, and then we'll close it off. Around a year ago, I was going through a challenge in my life. My father had sent me a video explaining how and when you should thank Hashem every day. It was wonderful, but the true test is thanking Hashem for the bad. My father passed away a few weeks ago. I'm so sorry to hear that. And I was looking through videos and found this. It was worth every part of the challenge I was having a year ago to have this chizuk right now. Oh wow, thank you so much. And your father's neshama should have an aliyah, and I'm assuming that's the name that you put in. So in the beginning of the class. So really, the neshama of Binyamin Rael ben Gershon Yeshaya should have a aliyah in his neshama, and he should be a melitz yesher to your entire family.